live.
You're okay? You're able to do it?
We're done. We're good.
Okay. So it's Bensi and Phyllis Friedman, Leilu Nishmas, Beresh Zolti.
So Rabbi Yisachar Doiv ben Reb Yosef?
No, Yisachar, just Doiv. Doiv ben
Reb Yosef.
Yes,
yeah. So I said over already 2 members from him.
Retransmission or other use of this broadcast for the express of Torah, for the promotion of Torah is encouraged, applauded, and appreciated.
Gewaltig. So I wanted to just say over a brief vertel from one of Beresh Zolti's legends. So he said over, it says that by a bar mitzvah, the minhag is that they sing in when the bar mitzvah boy speaks, in order not to embarrass the bar mitzvah boy who doesn't have the ability to be able to speak. They sing it by a chosen who says the drasha again. Shalom levai shum sheni yochel. Fregt Reb Beresh, favus is es, am zingt nicht daran bei a ruf, kedai shalom levai der ruf is kennisht. Dr. Beresh Zolti, a ruf is kennisht, darf man ihm ja mevazes an. As will an ruf in a kennisht, darf man ihm mevazes an. So I like that because that's the motto of this chabura. Because at the bagachir kennisht, darf man ihm ja mevazes an. No holds barred. And that's how we like doing it.
I'm terribly sorry. I disagree with you. As Aina has the chutzpah to get up in front of everybody and say that he knows and he doesn't know, have rachmunis on him.
Aina was it so viel Zeichel, as versteht nicht, auf ein Weg mit der rachmunis on.
So today in shul, I gave somebody to David, gave him maftir and musaf, and he said to me, "Okay, thank you." He says, "Oh, what are you doing? What are you bothering me?" I said, "Just say thank you for the opportunity. Just go do what you have to do. Just do the chesed." So someone else said, "We're the ones who have to have chesed. Torah, avodah, and gemilas chasadim. Torah is what the rav does. Chesed, avodah is what the chazan does." And Gemilas Chasadim is what the people do by putting up with the Torah and the Avodah and the Rav and the Chazan.
How is Rabbi Lloyd? Did he come to Shul Shabbos?
No.
How long is it going to take for him to get his new shoe?
I suspect this is strictly a theory. I think it's more than just a shoe.
The Rav is afraid to come to Shul.
What's that?
He's afraid to come to Shul.
Yeah. Or the foot is bothering him more than he's willing to tell us.
Akiva, I want to mention something. I have to correct myself. I told you something, and I want to clarify what I said. You asked me, would I be willing to wear a mask when we learn in shul? And my answer to you was, of course. But I have to modify that answer. The answer is, of course, if that's what the board decision is. Of course, I'll follow the board decision, but if the board decides that it's not necessary, then I'll also follow the board decision.
Okay.
But when it comes to the board decision, everybody will have to vote according to what they feel is the best for the shul. And once the committee that's in charge of the health makes the recommendation, then the board's going to have to vote on it. So I will 100% comply with whatever the board says. We're part of the Besmedish. We're part of a system, and we all have to commit to stick to the rules of that system. That's the only way we can have a proper moisid, is if everyone agrees to stick to the rules. So Agudah, we have to stick to the rules.
Yeah, the pretension of democracy is very important.
Of course. In other words, it doesn't make a difference what each person votes. The important thing is once the decision is made based on the decision-making process, everybody has to follow it, whether they were for it or against it.
Correct.
Because that's how the system works. Otherwise, you're questioning the results of a properly held election.
Yep.
Oh, election politic.
Oh yeah, you don't know the half of it yet. We're just
okay. So let's get started.
Up.
Let's get started. I think it's 10:35 already. Yeah, it's 10:33. So let's get started. Zok the Heilige Gemara. We were discussing this concept of tzedakah. It all started because Rabbi was playing with his child and was rubbing him up and down the side of an animal. And Abaye said, "Hey, you're not allowed to be mishamet with a Baal Chai. The reason why you're not allowed to be mishamash with a Baal Chai, because we're afraid if we let you sit on a Baal Chai, you'll break off a stick from a tree to use it to prod the animal. So because of that, they made a blanket rule, you're not allowed to be mishamash with a Baal Chai. So Rabbi suggested that you can't be mishamash with a Baal Chai, maybe that's sitting on top of the animal, but along the side of the animal, maybe it should be mutter. And that was the shaila if the Gemara, if you're allowed to be mishamash with the side of the animal. Then the Gemara wanted to suggest that it's a machlokes tanoim, whether or not you're allowed to be mishamash with the side of an animal. And the Gemara made another distinction, and that is that Abaye said that there's a difference between studden and studded studden. Studden means leaning on the side of the animal, which might be usher. Studded studden would mean if something was leaning on the side of an animal, are you allowed to lean on the side of that thing? So if we compare it to a tree, because this leaning on a tree is also usher, imagine I drill a hole in the side of a tree and I put a peg into it. That peg is studden. Studded studden. So the question is, if I'm allowed to lean on that peg, that's allowed in studden. But what if we hang something on that peg? And now I want to use the thing or lean on the thing that's hanging on the peg. That's studded studden, because the peg in the side of the tree is studden, and the thing hanging off that peg is studded studden. So Abaye made a distinction that even if studden or usher could be studded studden would be mutter. Rav says, and that's where we're up to, the second to the bottom line. Rav Amar, man the usher bit studden, usher nami bit studded studden. There's no way to make a distinction. Once you're answering studden, then any way, shape, or form that you're leaning or using the tree or a behema is going to be usher. So Zok Rava. Rava Omar man the usher b'studden, usher nami b'studden studden. Man the shori b'studden studden, shori nami b'studden. It's one and the same. Eighth favor of Mashar Shel Rava. Rabbi Mashar is going to prove that there should be a distinction between studden and studden studden. And his proof is from a shaila of Erev Tchumen. When you have an Erev Tchumen, what you do is you want to travel more than the 2,000 amos out of your city. So what you do is you create for yourself a piece mokum that's at the edge of the Tchum. So then you can go now another 2,000 amos past that piece mokum. How do you create a piece mokum? By placing yourself food there that you can eat. When you arrive there, that shows that's where your place is planted for Shabbos. So the Gemara discusses what's called food available, because of course everybody would agree the food that I'm planting has to be accessible to me to eat it, because if it's not accessible to me, that shouldn't really be considered that I'm creating myself a base out there. So of course this food must be available to me at the place where I left it, otherwise that wouldn't be a good Erev Tchumen. So what was the case? Not Yesed. You didn't want to just leave your food on the floor somewhere at the side of the highway. So what you did is not Yesed Be'ilam. You punctured a tree with a peg, and then Vitola Bal Kilkala, and you had a basket which contained your food, and you hung the basket on it. Now Rashi tells us that this basket had to have been 4 tefachim wide, because the normal basket, it's like a big picnic basket. A normal picnic basket would be 4 tefachim wide. So something that's 4 tefachim wide is a reshus for itself. So if you hung this basket on a tree, but not directly on the tree, but on the peg that was sticking out of the tree, so this is a typical case of studded studden, because the peg is in the tree, which is the studden, the basket is on the peg, which is the studded studden, and my food is in the basket. So if I put a what if this basket was suspended above 4 tvachim? That means it's in a reshus hayachid, because it's a reshus b'fnei atzmai. It's 4 tvachim. It's 10 tvachim above the ground in a reshus harabim, which makes it a reshus hayachid. So now he's in reshus harabim if he arrives to that place on Shabbos, and the food is in reshus hayachid. You're not allowed to take food from reshus hayachid to reshus harabim. So therefore, ein eruv ve'erev. His erev is not good because the food that he set up for himself at that location is not accessible to him. If it was less than 10 tefachim, then a Ruva Erev, because Erev is a good Erev, because that's not a Rosh Hashanah. Now, Toys was asked right off the bat, it might not be a Rosh Hashanah, but it's a Carmelis. If something's 4 Tvachim wide and it's less than 10 Tvachim above the ground, it has a din of a Carmelis. How could he access it? So Toys offers a shot that says that a Carmelis is only Osir D'Rabbanan. When does the Erev Chal? When does the Erev become an Erev at Bein HaShmoshes, which is when Shabbos is coming in? The Rabbanan who answered the Carmelis didn't answer the Carmelis Bein HaShmoshes, so there wouldn't be a problem. But I'll call upon him. This basket here, if it's above 10 Tvachim, and your Erev is not an Erev. Zok to Taima,
I ruined the grass.
Gotta mute. We're gonna mute. Let me mute everybody.
Jesse, you want to make me a host again?
Yes. Yeah, that'll be. Then you can mute everybody. Okay, done. Thank you.
Baruch Hashem. You didn't get me, Pia.
Okay, so let's go back. So you have this basket hanging. If it's l'mayla mi'asar tvachim, it's not an erev. If it's l'mata mi'asar tvachim, it is an erev. Now, why did the Brisa happen in a weird case? That he put a peg in the tree, and then he hung the basket on the peg. Why did the Brisa say a simple case? He hung the basket right on the tree. The only reason why we say it's a good erev, if it's l'mata mi'utvachim, is because it wasn't hanging directly on the tree. It was hanging on a peg that was hanging on the tree. Haloi nuts, if he hung this basket directly on the tree, then it would not even be a good erev if it was lamata yutvachim. Why not? Why not? Because that would be considered mishtamish with the ilan, and that he's not allowed to do. So kum techois, you have a raya from here, a tana, a high tana, to go osir b'stadin. This tana says stadin or osir. How do we know? Because he said you have to hang the basket on the peg, because shori b'stadin stadin. But when the basket was hanging on the peg, there he said it's mutter. So you see a clear distinction between stadin and stadin. Unlike Rava, who said that there's no need to make that distinction. Let's see Rashi. Time did not yesen. The chishokol le'ruvoi, when you're taking your food out of the basket, mishtamish b'tzadei stadin. You're using the basket, which is hanging on the peg, which is hanging on the tree. That's stadin. It's too removed from the tree. Avaloi not yesen. What if you directly tie the basket to the tree, to a branch? Then the Tana apparently wouldn't have allowed it, because otherwise why did the Tana have to come up with this extra step of not yasad ve'ilah? So you see that the Tana here, in fact, makes a distinction between stadin and stadin. And that's a kasha on Rav. After the Gemara, Amar Papa, the reason why it needed to be on a peg is because it's talking about a basket that's not wide open like a picnic basket. It's a basket with a very narrow neck. The Bahadi Shokal in the Erev, he has to stick his hand in the basket and put force on it. When he puts force on that basket, commanded Leila Ilam, he's going to be directly moving the tree, the Chamishamish, the Ilan Gufay. And he's going to be using the ilan itself. You're not allowed to move around the tree or lead directly to the tree. So therefore, since the only way for him to get stuff out of the basket is to put pressure on it, that's why the Tana needed to create that indirect connection through a yesed. It's a very narrow opening in the basket. And therefore, when he puts his hand into the basket, he has to put force on it, which is going to make the basket move and the peg move. Have a kotele b'tzadei ilan. If he would have tied the basket directly to the tree, when he takes the food out of the basket, he would inevitably shake the tree. So sure, by shaking the yesed, he's going to shake the tree. But that's so indirect, therefore it's not a problem. And that's why the Tana insisted on having this yaseh there, because if not, there would have been a whole different problem that he wouldn't be able to get his food out of the basket. And if you can't get his food out of the basket, it's not an erev tchum. Halacha l'maisa. Stodin asurin, tzadin stodin mutarin. So that's clearly like Abaye, right? Rava said you could not make a distinction between tzadin and tzadin stodin. Abaye said you could. Correct Toysvis, in Bava Kama, we all learned when we were young children in grade 5 or grade 6, we learned Bava Kama, and we learned the machlokes of Yishloi Midas. And at the end of that sugya, the Gemara said that Yishloi Midas, the halach is, even though normally the halach is like Rava, here the halach is like Abaye, because the halach is like Abaye by Yal Kigam, by the 6 things that are, the 6 sugyas that are hinted to in the Rosh Tevis Yal Kigam. Yud stands for Yishloi Midas. But here, by Tzaddik Stodin, the Gemara just paskin, the Hilchasat Stodin Asurin, Tzaddik Stodin Mutarin, which is like Abaye. Frek Toysvis, why wasn't this added to the famous list of Yal Kagam, where we passed like Abaye against Rava? Why was this omitted? And Toysvis bleibt schwer. Amar Bashi, hash to the Amit Stodin Asurin, now that we've reached the conclusion that Stodin are Osir, so leaning up a ladder against a tree is going to be a problem. High Darga, the Madla, they used to have guard towers, and they would have a place for a guard to stand very high up on a pole. How did you access it? You used to have to access it with a ladder, but they wouldn't lean the ladder on the pole. They would always create these poles right near a strong tree, like a palm tree, and they would lean the ladder up against the tree, and that's how the guard would climb up to get into his little guard booth. In Israel, that would be called a pillbox. So it says, do not lean the ladder right up to the tree. The Havalut Stodin, because when you climb up the ladder, which is leaning directly on the tree, you're being mishamish with the side of a tree, which you said is also. What you should do is you should put a peg in the side of the decal, and then lean the ladder up against that peg. So therefore, when you're climbing up the ladder, you're on Sadei Stodin, because you're leaning on the ladder, which is leaning on the peg, which is coming out the side of the tree. And when you come down from the guard tower, don't put your foot on that peg that's sticking out and use that as the first rung of the ladder, because then again you're being mishamish with the Stadei Ilam. Make sure when you put your foot on the rung, it's on the rung of the ladder, not on that peg, because you wouldn't be allowed to lean directly on that peg. And that takes us to the end of this Gemara, and now we're going to get into a whole new sugya, and it's called tircha. When you feed animals, even when you're allowed to feed animals, you're not allowed to engage in something which causes excess tircha. If it's excess tircha, the Rabbanan asr. So we're talking about different methods of feeding animals and what type of tircha is involved and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. So Zok the Mishnah will be very unclear.
Did we just finish that? We can't use the wall of the tree?
You're not allowed to lean on the side of a tree. That's correct.
On Shabbos, you're not allowed to lean on the side of the tree.
Correct.
Is that halacha?
That's a halacha, yeah. It's a Rabbanan halacha.
And you can't use something like is Akiva on the line?
Yeah, I am.
I'm thinking about that thing that you have on your tree.
Yes. So the zip line's very, very good question. So the zip line is not directly connected to the tree. There is a string.
So that's like a side, or.
So there is correct. It's not attached to one. One of them is a little bit more of an issue. And I discourage people from using that one. One of them is okay, and the other one is questionable. And we're adding a second rope. So if you add it, that's why a hammock is okay. If Shlomi Feintuch's on the line, use a hammock, because a hammock is not directly connected to a tree. It's connected to a carabiner or to a hook, and that hook is connected to something else that's connected to the tree.
Is David Zolti on the line?
He was. I saw him.
Because if he is, we have to know what the halach of a lejak is.
Yeah.
A lejak. We have to know if a lejak is allowed.
Lejak is not connected to a tree.
Okay, that's very important.
So
now
yes,
that's part of my
big...
vocabulary. I always have to make sure it fits in somewhere.
What's a lejak? What are we missing here?
It's a beach chair. Beach chair is the best way to describe it. It's the beach chairs that they sat on in Poland.
Right.
Okay.
I didn't realize it made such an impression.
If you ever go to a beach in Poland, you'll see a Agudah sitting on a lejak. Okay. Okay, so let's get back to feeding our animals. Zog the Heilige Gemara, the Heilige Mishnah. Matirin pikie amir lefnei behema. Now, this Mishnah will be very unclear because the definition of all these different things, the Gemara is going to elaborate upon. But we'll get through the Mishnah with a basic understanding, and then we'll rely on the Gemara to give us details. Matirin pikie amir lefnei behema. They would have bundles of straw that they would feed animals, but you can't serve them a tied up bundle. So you're allowed to cut open the bundle, undo the ties, so you open up the bundle, so now you have a whole bunch of loose stalks, and that would be the feed. So you're allowed to undo these bundles in front of a behemoth. Umefasfesin es hakipin. And kipin, you're allowed to not only unbundle them, you're allowed to spread them around and separate them. And Rashi tells us right in the Mishnah that you're allowed to because these grasses, when they're bundled tightly together, they warm up, and they don't emanate an aroma. They don't emit an aroma, and therefore the cows will not want to eat them. But once you separate them and spread them a little bit, that'll create a little bit of an aroma that the cows will then come running to eat. So Mefasel Zakipin. Now, what all these items are, the Gemara is going to get into detail. Avoloya says Zirin and the Bach is Zraden. You're not allowed to do Zraden. Again, what that means, the Gemara is going to elaborate upon. Ein Miraskin, you're not allowed to mince. Loya says Shachas, not the stubble, which would be straw, that would be fed to animals. Voloya says Charubin, and not books or carib, I guess they used to feed animals. You're not allowed to mince it lefnei behema, in front of a behema. Bein daka, whether or not it's a behema daka who has trouble chewing hard things, or vein gasa, or if it's a behema gasa who doesn't have trouble. Excuse me. Reb Yehuda mater becharuvin ladaka. Reb Yehuda says if it's a behema daka, and Rashi says it has weaker teeth, you're allowed to mince things so that it should be easier for the behema daka to eat. Now, this is all of this is going to change in the Gemara when the Gemara elaborates on the pshat of the Mishnah. Someone had a question? Okay, so look at the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna, it's a little bit complex, so we have to help cup. Amar Rav Huna. Hein pekoyin, hein kipin. Pekiyin and kipin are really the same thing. They're the same species of food. So matirin pekiye amar lefnei behema. So we need to understand if they're the same thing, why do they have a different halacha? So let's see what the Gemara offers. The difference is if you have a bundle, are you tying it in 2 places or are you tying it in 3 places? Anybody who ever used bamboo sticks as chach always has that decision every year when they bundle up their bundles of bamboo. Do they tie it on one end and on another end, or do they tie it a third time in the middle? And that's exactly what this was. So really, pekin and kipin were the same species, some type of straw, but pekin is tray. They used only 2 strings around it, one at the one end, one at the other end, and kipin klosa. They used 3. The Mishnah is telling us that you're even allowed to open up bundles that have 3 strings in them. Zraden is already a different species. It's the arzi. It's actually wood from a tree, but it's soft. It's soft when it first grows. It's soft. It only hardens later. So this is softened wood that has not yet hardened yet, and that could also be used as animal feed. However, the norm is to feed straw to an animal, pekia and kipin. But the norm is not to serve wood, which is really fuel, to an animal. But technically, you can repurpose, you can adapt wood that's still soft to be used as feed. But really, by default, it's not feed. And therefore, this is what the Mishnah means to say. Matirin pekie amir lefnei behema. You're allowed to open up these bundles of hay or whatever straw this was in front of a behema, umefasfesin, and you're allowed to be mefasfes. So now we'll go back to the Mishnah, and he's reading it a little bit differently than the way we understood it. Matirin pekie amir lefnei behema umefasfesin as a keeping, meaning you're allowed to be matir, you're allowed to open the bundle, and you're allowed to be mefassis, you're allowed to spread them out, both pekiyin and keeping. So it would have been much simpler for the Mishnah to say matirin umefasfisin pekiyin v'keeping, because that's really how Rav Huna is learning the Mishnah. That this hay, which is animal feed, you're allowed to open it up, and you're allowed to improve it by separating it to let it emit its aroma so that the animals can eat it. Avaloya says zirin, but zirin, which is really not animal feed, it's really wood, which is fuel that you want to make into animal feed. You're not allowed to use that at all. You're not even allowed to open up bundles. Why not? Omar B'chista, my time with Rav Huna. What is the logic behind Rav Huna's psak? So tomorrow, kasavar lemidrach b'uchla terchinan. Not only are you allowed to unbundle the food to provide it to the animal, but you're even allowed to be mefasfis. You're allowed to work extra hard to make it more appetizing for the animal, provided that it was always animal feed, even before you touched it. But the shavya uchla, but to take something that really isn't food, it's really firewood, and now repurpose it by cutting open the bundles to serve it to animals, so you're changing its status from firewood, which is muksa, to animal feed, which is not muksa, loy mishavina. That you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So let's just read the Mishnah based on the Pshat of Rav Huna. We have to get it clear, because otherwise it's going to be difficult to understand the rest of the Gemara. So let's see what the Mishnah says. Meaning these are both hay. It's just a question of how many ties there are around the bundle. You're allowed to open up the hay, and not only are you allowed to open it up, you're allowed to even do extra work on it to make it more appetizing by spreading it a little bit. That's because it's food already. Avaloy says Raiden, you're not allowed to touch Raiden at all, because those are really firewood. And you cannot take something that's muksa, that's firewood, and repurpose it to be used as food. That's the shita of Rav Huna with the explanation of Rav Chisda. Rav Yehuda learns the Mishnah totally differently. Rav Yehuda Amar, Heinin Pekin, Heinin Zirin. So Pekin and Zirin are the same, and Keepin is different. So he holds Heinin Pekin, Heinin Zirin. Pekin is tray, Zirin is tlasa. Pekin means it was tied up with two ropes around the bundle, and Zirin has 3. And Keepin the arzi. Keepin is this wood thing. This is how you read the Mishnah. Matirin Pekiye Amir Lifnei Behema. You're allowed to open up these bundles that have 2 strings around them. Aval Pispuse Loy. But you're not allowed to spread them out. You're only allowed to open it up. So these are feed. Even feed, you're not allowed to be matriach with it. All you're allowed to do is open it up to serve to the animal. You're not allowed to do extra tircha to make it more appetizing. The keepin, which are the arze, pispusinami mefas pesinam. There, the keeping, which was not Michael Bahem at all, it was wood, it was firewood. If it's not firewood, you're allowed to even, not only allowed to open up the bundle, you're also allowed to spread it, which is the exact opposite of what Rav Huna said. This is something that was not even an animal feed, it was wood, it was firewood. You're allowed to not only open up the bundle, but you're allowed to spread it out and make it more appetizing. Avoloy is a zirin, lefasves. The zirin, you're not allowed to open up. The zirin, remember, had 3 bundles. You're not allowed to spread them out, and you're allowed to open it. So, kum techais, just to be clear as to what's happening here. When you have animal feed, which is zirin and pekiyin, they're both animal feed. Animal feed, you're allowed to open the bundle, but you're not allowed to be matriach with the animal feed to make it more appetizing. But if keeping something that's not animal feed at all, something that's wood, that you're allowed to do everything to. It's even more cool. So let's see the Mishnah inside the way Reb Yehuda is learning it. Matirin Pekei Amir Lefnei Behema. You're allowed to open up bundles of feed in front of an animal, but you're not allowed to spread them. But wood, which is not food, not only are you allowed to open up those bundles, you're also allowed to make it more appetizing. Avaloy says zirin, but zirin is like pekiyin. Again, the Mishnah doesn't read that smoothly, because it would have been simpler to say matirin pekiya amir lefnei behema vezirin lefnei behema avaloy mefasfasin, and keeping is material umafasvasin. That would be the simplest way to say it, but it doesn't. But that's how Rabbi Yehuda learns it means to say. So let's see that again. Yehuda mahenin pekiyas henin zirin pekiyin trey zirin tloso keeping the arzi b'hachidavar material pekiki amir lefnei behema avo pespusi loy keeping pespusi nami paspusina avo loy hazirin lefasvis el lahati. What's the justification for that? Omarova, my time is Rabbi Yehuda. What's the for Rabbi Yehuda? Because Sover, he holds shivuya achluma shavina. You're allowed to do whatever you have to do to create food. This wood, this Eretz wood that was not feed, in order to make it into feed, you're allowed to do whatever it takes. Unbundle it and spread it around. Because you have to feed the animal. But midrach b'okla, once it's already food and it could be eaten, you're not allowed to put in extra labor and extra work to improve the quality, to make it geschmack. That you're not allowed to do. Bare minimum you're allowed to do to create food. But to do extra things, to make it more appetizing, that you wouldn't allow to be a triach on Shabbos. So that's
when it says untie, are we talking about a double knot or?
I doubt
it doesn't matter.
That's a deraisa. No, it can't be a kesher shel kayama, because if it's a kesher kayama, then you have deraisas involved. Here we're discussing only the fact that it's somewhat of a tircha.
Okay.
So thank you for bringing that up. It's a very important point. Thank you for bringing that up. It's important. Okay.
And the way Yosy Simon, the way you're learning the Mishnah is that the way you're learning the Gemara is that Reb Yehuda, who had a shita, had to fit it in with the Mishnah, even though the Mishnah did not read so well. Right?
It's not so super duper geschmack according to Reb Huna either.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, the reading of Mishnah is very not geschmack.
Got it.
Very not geschmack. You know, you could see how there's so much detail on this Mishnah in the Gemara. I just learned this Mishnah with my son. We were learning Mishnayos, and the Rav, the Bartanur is so long, and the Tosfos Yontif is this long, and the Kivegr is that long, and the Yochanan Boys, and I gave up at the end. I just fumbled through it. And you know, your kids, when you fumble through something, they can see right through you, no matter how fat you are. They see right through you. But now, at least I'm getting an understanding of it. And as I'm learning it, I'm feeling more and more foolish at how I fumbled when I was learning it with my son. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. So we learned, so that's just to, again, clarify in our minds. According to Reb Huna, you're allowed to be misasik with food. If you already have a Michael, you're allowed to be busy with it. If you don't have, it's not food, you're not allowed to do anything with it. According to Agudah, if it's already food, then you can't be busy with it because you're just allowed to make food. You're not allowed to enhance the food. But if it's not food at all and you need food, then you're allowed to make it into food. So that's the machloikis between Rav Huna and Reb Yehuda based on the explanation of Reb Chistenberg. Zok the head of the Gemara. Tanam. Ein miraskin es a shachas, which is the end of our Mishnah, I believe. Ein miraskin, you're not allowed to mince as a shachas, this stubble growing from the I guess it's after, I think they touch shachas as fodder. So it's some type of stubble, some type of hay. Vesa charuvin and boxer and carib. You're not allowed to mince it lefnei behema, bein daka ubein gais. So let's think about it. What exactly is this food? My love, charuvin dumi de shachas. We're not sure exactly what type of boxer this is, but we know what shachas is. Shachas is hard stuff. Soft stuff. Ma shachas, the rekichi, shachas is soft, that an animal can eat it without any special preparation. Af charuvin de rekichi. So we're speaking about soft food. Soft food, the halach is you're not allowed to be mirasik soft food, meaning you're not allowed to enhance the food. You're not allowed to enhance food that's already food. Who said that? That was the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that materin pekei amr lefnei beima avol pespusi loy, because once it's food, you're not allowed to be busy with it to make it better on Shabbos. If it wasn't food, you're allowed to work hard to make it into food. So it seems to tell us, this bride seems to tell us exactly what Rabbi Yehuda said, that it's speaking about soft stuff, it's food. Nevertheless, you're not allowed to mince it. That'll be shred Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said that if you have this hay that's already food, not only can you open the bundle, you're allowed to spread it as well to enhance it. So if you're allowed to enhance the straw at the beginning of the Mishnah, why can't you enhance the shachas and the charuvin at the end of the Mishnah by chopping them up? To the contrary, let's say that the shachas is similar to the charuvin in the Mishnah. Ma charuvin da kushi, charuvin boksher is normally hard and cannot be eaten by animals. It has to be chopped up to make it soft enough for animals to be able to use. Av shachas da kushi, the type of stubble that we're talking about is stubble that's hard to eat. What do you mean stubble is hard to eat? Stubble is stubble. It's not hard to eat. When would I consider stubble hard to eat? Be ilizutri. When I'm talking about young donkeys. For a young donkey, even the stubble that for a larger, more mature animal would be easy to eat without any preparation, we're talking about animals here that are much softer. So therefore, they're considered not food at all. If it's not food, that's why it's also to cut it up. Because according to Reb Huna, if it's food, you're allowed to be oisik with it. But if it's not food, you're not allowed to make it into food. And in this case, this for the young donkeys would not be considered food. Charuvin and shachas would not be considered food related to young donkeys. And therefore, you're not allowed to chop it up for them further. Gavaltik. Let's see what it says over here. Kushi koshin be'ilizudrei ayorim katanim she'av hashachas kosher utzriche risuk l'shvuye uchlo. You need to crush them just to make them into a food, and Rav Huna holds you're not allowed to make things into a food on Shabbos. Beautiful. So Rav Huna dodged the first bullet. Now the Gemara is going to bring up another bullet. Tashma. Rabbi Yehuda, again, this is the end of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'charuvin l'daka. Rabbi Yehuda says a behemoth daka who has soft teeth can't chew so much. He's going to allow you to chop up the charuvin. So it seems, if you look at the Mishnah at face value, it says dafka l'daka. Rabbi Yehuda is only mekel for behemoth daka because the behemoth daka can't eat the food unless you chop it up. L'daka in l'gasaloi, which means if it's not food, if it's a behemoth daka and it's not food, then he allows it. But if it's a behemoth gasa and it is food, there it's not allowed. That's exactly the opposite of Rav Huna's approach. If you learn, like the Shita of Reb Yehuda, that you're not allowed to enhance food, but you're allowed to make something into food, so then Haini de Ka'omer Reb Yehuda, then it makes sense what Reb Yehuda said, that he's matir chopping up charuvin l'daka. Why? Because nami shvuya oichlahu. That's called making it food. Rabbi Yehuda is disagreeing, and he's saying that making that for behemoth daka, chopping up charuvin is called making food, and therefore it's going to be allowed. If you're going to like Rabbi Huna, but the Tanakama holds shvuya uchla loy mishvinan, you're not allowed to make something into food, but mitrach b'uchla, if it already is food, matrichinan, you're allowed to do that. Well, then Rabbi Yehuda the matir b'charuvin l'daka kol shkei l'gasa. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if you're matir by daka, by an animal who can't even eat this food, he can't eat the charuvin unless you chop it up. So if you're matir to chop it up for behemoth daka, that means you're being matir something that's not food and you're making it into the food. Kol shkei l'gasa, where you're only enhancing the food, because right now we're working with a frame of mind that it's much more osur to make food than it is to enhance food, because that's Rav Huna's Shita. So if Rabbi Yehuda holds that by charuvin you're allowed to do it for a daka because you're making it the food because the daka needs it to be softer to be able to eat it, kol shegen lagasa, for sure he should be mat lagasa. And Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say that. Rabbi Yehuda just says for a daka would be mutter, mashma for a gasa would be osur. According to Rav Huna, for a gasa it should sure be osur. So Gemara, mi sovis daka mamish. Do you think when Rabbi Yehuda said daka, he meant daka? No. When Rabbi Yehuda said daka, he meant behemoth gasa. My daka, gasa. How could a behemoth daka be a gasa? Should have said gasa. Umay karila daka. V'amay karila daka. Why is Rabbi Yehuda referring to a behemoth gasa using the word behemoth daka? So tomorrow, because the daika ba'uchla. This is an animal who is careful with what he eats. So what does Rashi say? Rashi says the daika koiseses yofe umadekas oichlin bepiyah. He's matir by a behemoth gasa because a behemoth gasa chews it up. and therefore it's considered food for a behema gasa, and all you're doing by chopping it up is enhancing it, and that's why Reb Yehuda holds it's allowed. Frank the Gemara, that doesn't make sense to say, because how the Katani Resha, Bein Daka Vein Gasa, if the Tanakama expresses it as behema gasa and behema daka, using the word gasa for behema gasa and using the word daka for behema daka, Mechlal the Reb Yehuda daka daka mamish kamar. How could you say that when Reb Yehuda uses the same word daka in his argument with the Chachamim that he means to refer to a behema gasa using the word behema daka? That doesn't make any sense at all. So Tamar Kasha, you're right. That is a little bit funny, but the Gemara still doesn't say that Reb Yehuda is Agushal. So now we have another raya, this time Kasha on Reb Yehuda. Toshma. Again, just to remind yourselves, what is the machlokes? Reb Huna said that anything that's already food, you're allowed to be matriach with it to enhance it. If it's not food, then it's mukshi, not allowed to make into food. Reb Yehuda said exactly the opposite. If it's already food, then you're not allowed to be matriach more to make it better. But if it's not food, you're allowed to do something to make it into food. So Toshma, mechatchin es hadaluin, you're allowed to cut up daluin. Daluin is something that would normally be food for humans. Nevertheless, you're still allowed to cut it up on Shabbos in front of a behema. And there's a nevela lefnei klavim. And you're allowed to cut up meat, nevela meat, in front of dogs. So let's think about this. My log, the luin dum de nevela. The luin, which the Tana lists off in the same list as nevela, it's similar. Ma nevela dirakicha. Meat is always soft. So just like the meat of a nevela is soft, af luin dirakichi. The luin are also soft. Meaning, if they're soft, then they're already edible. They're already food. So how come you're allowed to cut them up? Alma terchina b'uchla. You see, like Rav Huna, that you're allowed to take the loon, which are already soft, they're already edible, they're already meichel behema, and you're allowed to enhance it by chopping it up further. That's a right to Rav Huna, and it's shver v'tuv to Reb Yehuda. It's Reb Yehuda who holds once something's food already, you're no longer allowed to enhance it. You're not allowed to improve the quality of the food. Don't say it's soft, say it's hard. It's not a meichel. Mad luin, the shudi, just like the luin are hard and you can't eat them. After nevela, the ashuna, the nevela was hard. The heichem ishkachesla. How do you ever have hard meat that's not considered meat, not considered food, unless you mince it up? So tomorrow b'basar pili, elephant meat. Elephant meat is very hard meat, and even a dog, a carnivore, wouldn't be able to eat elephant meat unless it's chopped up. Inami or bigorisa, zutri. We're talking about little puppies. Regular meat, even for little puppies, is too hard for them to chew apart. So we're talking about something that would not have been edible at all to these animals before, and by you cutting it up, you're making them edible, and that's perfectly consistent with Reb Yehuda, who holds that you're not allowed to improve, enhance food once already is food. But if it's not edible at all to these animals, then you're allowed to cut it up or process it so that it becomes food for these animals. So again, we have a machlokes of Huna and Reb Yehuda, which is not yet resolved. Toshma, the Tani Reb Chanan minaharda, mifarchinan teven, you're allowed to break up straw, vaspasta and fodder, uma arvin, and you're allowed to even mix teven and aspasta together. So you see, alma terchinin v'ochla. Avaita, you see that if it's already food, because we assume teven is already food, aspasta is already food, yet you're allowed to process them more. That's a right to Rav Huna and not against Reb Yehuda. So tomorrow, no, teven v'tivnesari, the hay itself is not a meichel by itself because it's somewhat rotten, and therefore the only way for animals to eat it would be if you mix it with the other fodder. That'll make it edible for them. So therefore, again, by mixing it together and chopping it up, that's making it into a food. Aspasta bila zutri, and aspasta again is something that's very hard for a young animal to eat, for a young donkey to eat, and therefore it would have had to be chopped up. So at the end of the Gemara, we're non-conclusive. We don't know if we pass on like Reb Yehuda or if we pass on like Reb Huna. Are you allowed to make something into food on Shabbos? We don't know. If you already have food, are you allowed to enhance it on Shabbos? Again, we don't know. It wasn't finalized in the Gemara. Now we're getting into force feeding. everybody probably heard of a gestopte Gans. A gestopte Gans is in Europe. They wanted to fatten up a duck so that it should be fat to eat. So they would force feed it, which many Gedolim held that it makes them treifa, and you're not allowed to eat such things. They had force-fed veal. All of these things are a shaila, but they're treifa. But this is something that used to do. Now, for camels, imagine you have a mission. You're an Israeli pilot. You have a mission in Entebbe, and your fuel tanks are not big enough to get you to Entebbe. So what do? Most of these jets have the ability to connect to them an auxiliary fuel tank. Most of these jets, for longer flights, if they cannot refuel in midair, have auxiliary fuel tanks. So first they fill up the main tank, and then they put in an auxiliary fuel tank. So camels used to have the same thing. What they would do is a normal camel will eat enough to last them a day, whatever it is. But if I'm going to be taking my camel and I'm going to be going through the desert for 2 weeks, I need to make sure to fill up the fuel tank. So they would force feed the camel so much by shoving food down its throat until it was so full that it would have enough fuel to last through its journey. And sometimes they even put an auxiliary fuel tank. They also took some more feed and they put it into a package that they put on the camel as part of its cargo. And this way they were able to have an extended range on their camel.
Makes it a treifa or just Sar Balachayim?
I don't know. I don't know about those halachas. I was just bringing that up to create some familiarity with the concept of stuffing animals. So our discussion here is on Shabbos. Are you allowed to stuff an animal?
There was a question many years ago in Oberland and Interland. In Oberland hat man gegessen gestoppte Gans, and in Interland hat man nicht gegessen gestoppte Gans.
So it's a shot of treifa then.
The Samseufer gewesen by the gestoppte Gans, and the other Gedolim were by the other side.
Uh-huh.
They said, whoever didn't eat the gestoppte Gans in Mattisdorf, he gewesen a nar.
Uh-huh.
And there was hat gegessen in Interland, he
You got
gewesen a
target.
Yashikoyach Rebel.
My great-grandmother would always say regarding someone putting on a stramo, if it wasn't their minig, she would always say, anar titasun, in a shaygitz titasos. Okay, sagt the Heilige Mishnah. Ein oivsin es a gomel, you're not allowed to overstuff a camel. Oivsin is from the Lashon an ovus. An ovus is a trough from where an animal eats from. So it means you shove so much food into the animal that the animal itself is a trough. He himself is a reservoir of fuel. V'loy darsin, and you're not allowed to be doiris either. And Rashi says, shedoiris law, the seich grana es hasa'arin, he forces in the barley into the neck of the animal. You're not putting as much. Often you mean you're literally overstuffing this animal. Darsin means you're stuffing it, but not overstuffing it. Avo malitin. What malitin is, the Gemara is going to tell us. So malitin is a different level of stuffing. Ve'ein mamirin yisa'agolim. You're not allowed to mamir yisa'agolim, which again is the type of stuffing that the Gemara is going to explain. Avo malitin u'mahalkatin l'tarnagolim. And Rashi is going to tell us that all of these words, mamirin, malitin, malaktin, mahalkatin, they all mean the same thing. They're just different words used to describe the same activity at different animals. So when you talk about camels, you use the word oivsin and dorsin and malitin. And when you talk about agolim, calves, you talk about mamirin and malitin. And when you talk about birds, you talk about mahalkatin. But they all mean the same thing. And that'll be very relevant in the Gemara. V'noisten mayim l'mersin. You're allowed to mix water into bran on Shabbos. Avaloy goyvlin. But you're not allowed to knead it into a mush, into a mash. Ve'ein noisten mayim l'fnei dvarim. You're not allowed to serve water in front of bees. L'fnei yonim shebeshayvach. Or you're not allowed to put water in front of doves that are in a coop. Avol noisten l'fnei avozim. You're allowed to put water in front of geese, the tanagoyim and chickens, which were more domesticated doves, there you're allowed to. And the Gemara is going to discuss the reasoning for this is, do they depend on you for this nourishment, or are they able to find this on their own in the wild? Because if they are, we know that would be matriach. But if they don't have anywhere to eat, then we have to take care of our animals, and we have to be matriach. Zok the Gemara. My ein oifsen. What does it mean you're not allowed to stuff a camel? On Reb Yehuda, ein oifsen lo evos b'soich me'ah. You're not allowed to make a trough, a feeding trough, inside the stomach of the animal, meaning you're filling it up so much that it acts as a reservoir. Zok the Gemara. Mi ika kahai gavna. Is there such a thing? Do people actually do something like this? Could you actually fill up an animal so much that his stomach will blow up to contain and act as an auxiliary fuel tank? As a matter of fact, yes. I saw this traveling merchant who had camels. The achla kura, he would shove a kur of produce into the animal's stomach, and then vatina kura, and then he strapped on an auxiliary fuel tank, and he had another core of fuel on top of the animal. Of course, the animal was able to carry other things as well. Otherwise, he's not really accomplishing anything. If you fill up the entire payload bay with fuel, then what are you transporting? Ein oisin, ein mamirin. So what does it mean, ein mamirin? Eza hi hamra. What is this action of stuffing that we're referring to? Eza hi halata. And what is halata? Amar Agudah, hamra is lemokem she'en yichayil lahachzir. Hamra is when you shove the food so deep into the throat of the animal that it's past the swallow point. So therefore, it has no choice but to let it go down into its stomach. It can't cough it out. But halata is putting it in deep, but it's lemokem she'yichayil lahachzir. The animal can still regurgitate. So it's not pushing it down as far, and therefore it wouldn't be nearly as much as a tircha. So before I go weiter, let me just look in the Mishnah. So it says hamra is more. So it makes sense. Ein marmirnes hagolim. You're not allowed to shove it down so deep that the animal is forced to swallow it. Avol malitin. You're allowed to put it in deep enough that it could still spit it out. So that makes sense. Reb Chisda Amar, idi v'idi lemokem she'einu yachoyel lahachzir. Both hamra and halata means you're putting it down so deep that that the animal won't be able to get rid of it. But for hamra bekli halata biyad. So let's have a look back at the Mishnah again. It says ein mamrinis hagolim. You're not allowed to shove food so deep down using a keli, using some type of tool. Avol malitin, with your hand, you're allowed to push the food all the way down. That's how Reb Chisda is. Zok the Gemara, Moshe Reb Yosy. Reb Yosy has a kasha. It says in the Mishnah, mahalketin l'tarna goyim. You're allowed to do something called mahalketin l'tarna goyim, like our Mishnah says. But the Brisa adds, vein tzarech loimer, it's poshut shemalkitin. So clearly mahalketin is pushing the food down further than malkitin is, because malkitin is surely allowed if mahalketin is allowed. The ein malkitin l'yon shayvach. You're not allowed to do malkitin l'yon shayvach u'lyon eliyah. And then oibazoi surely vein tzarech loimer shein mahalketin. So clearly mahalketin is more than malkitin. What are these two items? My mahalketin u'may malkitin. Ilema mahalketin the safila biyadayim. If you say mahalketin means you shove it down with your hands, and malkitin is a less of a thing. Is the shadi lekamei? You just put the food in front of them, but you don't even force feed them. Mechlal the yoydi shoivech v'yoyni aliyah mishtu kamayu nami loy. The Brisa said that you're not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to do anything for the yoyni shoivech and the yoyni aliyah. Why wouldn't you be able to just put food out on the floor for them to eat? You're not doing anything. That doesn't make sense. Ella, the only way you could explain it is that mahalketin is putting it down so deep, l'makom she'eini yachol lahachzir, and malkitin is l'makom she'yachol lahachzir. Now, since we know that all of these activities that we're discussing in all the animals are the same, it's merely a question of what word is used to describe the action. So mechalal the hamra is going to be bechli, because what are we saying over here? We're saying here that mahalketin is l'mokim shein yochel lahachzir. So let's look at the Brisa. The Brisa said mahalketin l'tarna goyim. You're allowed to push it back so deep where it won't come back. Vein tzarech loimer shel malkitin. Surely you're allowed to push it in only deep that it shouldn't come back. So let's have a look at the Mishnah. It says, Ein mamir nisagol. You're not allowed to be mamir, aval mal'itin, umahalkatin, l'tar negolim. So clearly, that mamirin is going to be worse than mahalkatin. And over here it says over here that il mahalkatin savi b'dayim malkin d'shoy le'kamayu mechal di l'shoy elo la mahalkatin l'mokum she'en yochel l'chaser. Mahalkatin has to be where you push it back so far that it can't spit it out, and malkitin is you put it in deep enough where it could come out. Mechlal hamra has to be even more than that. Because if you look at the Mishnah, it says Ein mamir nisagolim, but you are mahalkatin. So clearly Hamra is even worse than that. So Hamra must be that you're doing it with a keli. And the Mishnah says beferish, Ein mamir nisagolim. Ein mamir nisagolim. So you're not allowed to stuff it in so deep into the golem's mouth, into the golem's throat, into their stomach with a keli. But you have to do Reb Yehuda, who says that you're allowed to. Because Reb Yehuda says Hamra is l'mokum she'en yochel hachser. And halot is l'mokum she'chol hachser. But with a keli, for sure, you're not allowed to. Here it says that you should be allowed to. Mahalkatin means you're doing it by hand. Malkitin the shadla kamayu, you're just putting it in front of them. You the kakashalach yoyni shoybech yoyni aliyah lemisha kamayu nami loy. Why can't you just put food in front of them? So the reason why you're not allowed to even put food in front of these animals, even though you're not feeding them, you're just putting the food out, is hanim is a notion alecha. Birds who rely on you to feed them, there you're allowed to do something for. But v'hani, this yoni shoivech and yoni aliyah, you're not even allowed to put out food to them because enim is a notion alecha. They're going to find food outside. They fly around and they can find food elsewhere. Kidatanya, like we learned, noistin mizoinos lefnei kelev. You're allowed to put food in front of a dog because a dog relies on you for food. You're not allowed to put food in front of a chazir. What's the difference? A dog is relying on you for the food, and a pig you don't have to feed. And Rashi says right away, you're not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be raising them. But a wild dog that comes to you, you have to feed because it needs food. Amar Bashi, Masnisa Namideka, our Mishnah also is showing us that it makes a difference between if the animals are relying on you for feed or not. Because the Mishnah says, you're not allowed to put water in front of bees, and in front of doves, in your coop. What's the difference? My timer, lav mishum, the hanim is a notion alecha, the hanim is a notion alecha. If the animal is relying upon you for food, then you're allowed to be matriach on Shabbos to feed it. But if not, then you're not allowed to. If bees rely on you for food, so what's up with stuff with water? If the bees and these other animals are relying on you for food, you should be able to serve them anything, not only water. Ella, you don't have a right from here. Shiny maya, the shchichi ba'agma. The chiddush is that water they can always get, and therefore you're not allowed to serve them water. But food, which they might not be able to get elsewhere, there you might even be able to feed them food. Dosh Reb Yoina Pischa Devenesia. Reb Yoina Darshit. Maidich Siv says in the pasuk, Yedei Tzadik Din Dalim. Hashem knows the stress and the difficulties that poor people go through, and we darshin. Yedei Kadosh Baruch Hu Begelav Shemuzay Noisem Muatim. Rebbeinu Shalom knows that the dog doesn't have access to a lot of food. Therefore, Hashem made it that a dog, it takes 3 days for a dog to digest food that it eats. Now, the halacha is, if a dog eats a kazais minames, a dog eats a human piece of meat. So a human piece of meat is matama ba'oil. So what if you have a human meat inside the stomach of a dog? Is that matama ba'oil? The halacha is it's not. Because since it's inside a live animal, it's called a tuma, I forgot the word for it. It's called a tuma balua. Yeah, it's swallowed within the animal. It will not be matama ba'oil. But if the dog dies, and now the dog is also just plain meat, now the meat in its stomach is not a tuma balua anymore, because it's no longer inside a live animal, and therefore it will be matama ba'oil if it's in the oil. The question is, eventually, the meat in the stomach of the dog rots, and once it rots, it's no longer metallic oil. So how long is the lifespan of a human piece of meat in the stomach of a dog that it'll still be metallic oil? So the Gemara in the Brisa, Kama tisha chilosai b'meyav v'yetame. How long could meat be in the intestines of a dog and still can be considered meat? So Gemara b'kelev gimel yomim me'es leis. 3 days exactly. So it's exactly 72 hours is exactly the amount of time that meat still retains its meat, but still retains its status of meat. So if the dog dies 3 days, 72 hours after it ate the meat, then there's no problem of tumah. But if the dog died within 72 hours of it eating this human meat, then the meat will be b'tameh ba'oil once the dog dies. Ba'ovis to the dogim, they digest their food much faster. Is the amount of time that it lasts intact in the intestines of a bird or a fish is the same amount of time that it would last if you dropped it into a fire. So a couple of minutes. You see from here that the right thing to do. You see, you're supposed to feed dogs. Hashem worries about them. You're supposed to feed dogs. How much should you feed a dog? When you feed a stray dog, how much should you feed it? Amar Mori, the size of an ear. So I guess a hamantash sized piece of meat. But the chudra basrei, after you feed the dog, whack it with a stick. You know why you should whack it with the stick? Because you don't want it to come back. Some people wish they could do this to mishalachim. Hanimili b'dabra. That's only if you're in the wild, and the chances are it's not going to follow you home after you whack it with a stick. Albamasa, in your city, never feed a cat. Loi, the asala misra. If you feed the dog once, it's going to come back every day, and it's going to eat you out of house and home. Amar Papa. Lesta oni mekalbo. There's no poorer animal than a dog, because a dog is picky about what it eats, and therefore it's always struggling to find food. But the less the aser mechazeir, no one's richer than a pig. You know why? The Rashi, shekol Michael royal, a pig can eat anything. He'll always be able to find what to eat. And also, pigs tend to be fed a lot. Tanya Kavas Reb Yehuda. Eze hi amra, ve'eze hi halata. What's the difference between amra and halata? Amra is marbitza. You force it down on the floor, where it's much easier when it's lying on the floor to stuff it. Upoikas espia, you wedge open its mouth. Umachila karshinan umayim bevasachas, you serve them together. Oats, I think, and no, karshin is not oats. I don't know, something of beans and water bevasachas. And Rashi tells us, because when you serve these two things together, when you mix the feed with water, when you force water down, it's like waterboarding. You force the food down with water into the stomach of the animal. Halata is much more humane. Machila mu'uimid, you let it stand up and you feed it properly. Umashke ma'imid, and you let it drink standing. It's a much more tame way of feeding an animal. There's more about it. Now, how can you look at the GEESE? And then the Gemara says, after it says, the Gemara goes on and says that you're allowed to mix mine and murson, but you're not allowed to knead them together. So the question is, what's called kneading? Amar Abaye, Amrisa Kamei Demar, Masnisan Mani. I said in front of my Rebbe, who's this Mishnah going like? He told me, Reb Yosy Bar Yehudi. This Mishnah that says that you're allowed to mix flour and water together, so to speak, bread and water together, without actually physically kneading them, that's going according to Reb Yosy Bar Yehuda. The Tanya, Echad noisnes a kemach, ve'echad noisel asoichimayim. If one person this is like when they bake matzahs, one person pours the flour into the bowl, and then the second guy pours water into the bowl. Even though you didn't knead it yet, the mere mixing water and flour is already an issue daraisa of kneading. You're only chayiv when you actually do the kneading. Therefore, mixing it together alone is not going to be an issue, and that's exactly what our Mishnah says. You're allowed to put water and karshina together, or immerse them together. What was the lashon? You're allowed to put you're allowed to put mayim into the morshin of a logoivin. You're not allowed to physically knead it, but you're allowed to mix it together. So that goes according to Reb Yosy Bar Yehuda. Maybe where did Reb Yosy Bar Yehuda say that it's not called a malacha until you actually need it? Kemach is something that you're normally going to need. Since you didn't need it, you didn't do the malacha, and therefore you're not over. Morshan is something that you cannot knead. It's not designed to knead. So maybe just mixing it, that's called kneading. Maybe I feel like Reb Yosy Bar Yehuda moed that will be aser. So tomorrow I can prove to you otherwise. The Tanya Behedja, we learned that they argue specifically by Morshan. The Tanya Behedja ain't noised in Mayim Lemorsan Divi Rebbe. So you clearly see that there's a machloikus here by Morshan as well, and that's why Abaye said very good. But my Rebbe said that this Mishnah, our Mishnah, is going according to Reb Yosy Bar Yehuda. Okay, I guess we could stop here. What time are we doing tomorrow? We usually learn at 6:45. Does that work?
I'm game.
Okay. Now, we also usually have a shir at 9. I will not be able to make the 9 o'clock shir because there's only one minyan here at 9. So I could either, if we're learning 6:45 till 8, let's say, till 8:45, so I could learn any time between 8:45 to 8, 8:15, if the other wants, or I could learn at around 10 o'clock, whatever the other would rather, for the second shir. Do we have a vote? Should we do 8?
I can do 10.
Okay, you prefer 10? Anybody? Is there anybody else who's planning to come to the later year?
I think I'll do 6:45 tomorrow.
I cannot do 10 or 9.
You can't do 9 or 10.
No, I could do 9, but you can't do 9. So
I can 9.
yeah, I mean, I'm okay with YouTube Live or YouTube, whatever.
Okay. So then I guess we'll do 10.
Yossi Zalman, I have a dare for you.
Sure.
The Tiferes Yisrael says that the Gemara, when there's a Chesuri Mechzer in the Mishnah, how did that come to be? So the Tiferes Yisrael offers a solution as follows. He says that years ago, in the days before the Gemara being written down, they used to use a niggin in order to remember the brises.
Right.
So the Tiferes Yisrael says that the niggin was the Mishnah somehow didn't fit the niggin, so they had to shorten the Mishnah. In order to fit the niggin. So I asked my father at the time. I said, I don't understand. If there's a Sefer Torah, and they hire a seamstress to make the cover for the Sefer Torah, the garments for the Sefer Torah, and the mantle for the Sefer Torah. Right, I'm sorry. And the mantle is a little bit too short. Are they going to cut the Sefer Torah in order to fit the mantle? But be that as it may, that's what the Tiferes Yisrael offers. What is my dear to you is, what does this have to do with our Gemara that you just taught us today?
Well, we learned 2 Mishnayos which seemed not to make sense at all, and all the pshatim that we had for them, Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, they both didn't really fit in with the reading of the Mishnah. So it could be, if I look at it from a poetic perspective, maybe then the way the Mishnah reads would work well.
Okay, that's a solution I didn't think of. Yasher Koyach. The reason what brought that to my mind was you told us originally about a Yal Pegam.
Right.
Right now, Yal Pegam fits in nicely with those words. And Tosfos out of Bleib Shver, why this other Mishnah, why this other halacha was not part of the Yal Pegam. Right, Stodid. So maybe it's possible that it's just somehow they couldn't figure out a way how to put that into a nice way of Yal Pegam.
But I want to tell you over what Rav Mendel used to say, because you said you had Shver. If the mantle of the Sefer Torah is too short, would you cut the Sefer Torah?
Who, Reb Mendel Kaplan?
Well, no, you asked this question now, right? So Reb Mendel told us another pshat of Chesur Mechzer, which I think dovetails very nicely with what you said over from the Tiferes Yisrael. We know that the writing of the Mishnah was a huge compromise. It was an Eis Lasis Lashem Eferus Harisecha, because it was Torah Shabbat about Peh, it wasn't supposed to be written down.
Agreed.
Yet they decided to write it. So because of that, the Mishnah is not a comprehensive halacha. not a Sefer Rambam. The Mishnah is a code. It's a bare minimum code that, if analyzed properly, you'll be able to extract all of the necessary halachas. So the Mishnah was written in such a way where it would be easy to remember as like poetry, so to speak, which is what the Tiferes Yisrael is saying. But if you're medayik in it properly, you'll also be able to extract all the information you need. So chesur mechsur, it doesn't mean an editing mistake. They forgot something. It means that they wanted to write the Mishnah in as a concise, easy to remember poetry, but the Gemara, using its analytical skills and asking kashas, would be able to extract all the hidden information that's included in the words of the Mishnah.
Yes,
so now
this
it's
is
not
my
anymore cutting the months too short. They want it to be short. They want the Mishnah to be written short.
Whoa.
So that people could remember it and say it over as poetry, but as long as there's enough information that you can extract from it the full understanding.
Very nice. Very nice. I actually have a love-hate relationship when things are so easily accessible to, to us and to Goyim and, the YouTube, the idea of putting on Torah on YouTube for every Goy to argue with me and tell me what the Gemara says here and what the Gemara says there. I find that a bit concerning, but be that as it may, there's no question. I'll bring into just a short little subject so I don't monopolize your time. Is that I always say that the art scroll has something over a shear, and the art scroll when you stop concentrating with the art scroll Gemara, it stops teaching. But your shear, when I stop concentrating, you still teach. So there's still something to be gained by learning with an art scroll.
The only problem with the art scroll Gemara is I don't know if you remember when we used to learn as kids, we used to learn to grab a finger. Remember that?
Right? Yeah. Now you need to.
So we don't grab a finger anymore because your fingers are on Gemara, Rashi, and on the art scroll. So because of that, the whole grab a finger got wiped out.
I could talk to you all night about this.
Chaim, I'm going to take an exception a little bit. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm going to take a little bit of an exception.
I hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I know you're here. The question is if you're listening, but
I'm listening and I'm trying to understand. It's a whole different here.
Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz passed away this past week.
Oh, really?
Yes. I couldn't believe he was only 83. It was kind of depressing. He was 83 and accomplished so much. I thought the guy was for sure 105. Mm-hmm. He wrote so many Sfarim. He translated the Gemara before Art Scroll came around. And he got chastised because he changed Surah Sadaf. He had Nekudis. He had pictures. It's unbelievable, the work that he did. But to get back to the point about the achrayus of teaching Goyim, no one says that you have to teach Goyim Torah, but the Jews do have an achrayus to the non-Jewish world in a big way. We're a light onto the nations, and the Torah is a light onto the nations, and you carry that light. And when you go among Goyim and they want to ask you a question about learning or Torah, you represent more than Art Scroll. You represent generations, past and present and future, and right there, you're going to make an impact in his life. And you can't run from that achrayus.
Rabbi Akiva, do you have a bottle of schnapps?
I do. Right here.
Do you have a pack of cigarettes?
I'm willing to learn again. It's not such a hard malacha that I'm not willing to try cigarettes again.
Oh, I have to call you privately, and we're going to have a whole night.
With pleasure.
Okay.
With pleasure.
Good
Vach. Yeah, Reb Steinsaltz passed away. Big tzaddik. Okay.
Reb Steinsaltz had the right idea at the wrong time.
Well, you want to talk about evolution or about being a Molek or Nachshon ben Aminadav? He was blasted by the Yeshiva Shevelt.
You got
First,
it
he's
all
a little
wrong.
bit Zionistic, and he's
You
a
got it
little
all wrong. You guys got it all wrong. Steinsaltz is an Israeli that built in Israel and came. Nosson Sherman went first to Reb Yankov Kamenetsky and to the Gedolim and started asking if he can do EIKAV. And then he went to the Gemara. Years later, Art Scroll started 30 years ago. And the first book that he translated was Megillah Esther. Years later, he went to the Gemara.
Yeah, but I think that Chaim Tzvi's point, Rebel, are you still making that point?
No,
I think that what Chaim Tzvi was saying, though, it's not that we're not a beacon to the world and that we are examples and all that. But when you have all this information out there that Goyim see, it, you know, like you see what the Goyim are doing right now. They can't deal with people being free thinkers and having their own das. They want to control it. That's the same thing that happened with burning the Gemaras in France. What was that? They didn't want us to be able to have our own thoughts. So the more that it's out there for Goyim, I think it's dangerous for us.
I don't think so. I think that anything that it's out there, what's meant to be taught, this is our.
We're not supposed to teach
responsibility to continue
Goyim.
teaching it. I'm not no, but there's components of Torah that they need to know. The Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach is our.
Oh, you're talking about today's Sikha. You're talking about today's Sikha. The Sikha.
I got to tell you,
EIKAV.
you don't remember?
You talking about the Sikha today?
Yeah, we didn't. That's
we
right.
learned it here. We learned it here.
Did you? Who with Rosenzweig?
No, Adler, his Adam.
Oh, yeah, he was the. But I have to tell you that Sal Litvak, the accidental Talmudist, most of his followers are Goyim. And he's learning the Gemara. If you ever tune into his shir and you listen to it, he's bringing Torah mostly to Jews. Goyim happened to listen. And what happened is when Goyim are taking interest in it, the Jews go, hey, wait a minute. What about us? You don't shy away from it. I don't know why would
ultimately with
feel
time,
uncomfortable. There's no
ultimately
reason to
with
feel
time when they
uncomfortable.
pick up. No, you don't have to feel uncomfortable. Ultimately, with time, the Goyim are going to make a ruckus about because they want to control our thought. That's what's going on in America right now. You can't have the history. Everything. That's the whole cancel culture.
They're trying to eradicate. It's all about eradicating the Rabbeinu Shloim. That's what it comes down to.
Okay,
Everything from denial of gender and where you have to. And I am almost, because of what's going on in America, the kneeling during the national anthem is a chutzpah. The one thing left that united the country was sport, and even that they're trying to break apart, and then to kneel during the national anthem is a chutzpah. I want to know if Colin Kaepernick kneels when they gave him his $1 million check. If LeBron James is so concerned about black slavery, let the Goyim learn how Jews dealt with slavery. We celebrate our freedom every single day.
That's exactly the
we
point. That's
what are they doing?
They don't want to remember, and that's one of our zechiras. So we have to remember that we were avadim.
So it's our responsibility to teach Goyim how to remember. We're the ones who teach
that way.
Goyim how to live and how to die and how to remember. Where are they going to learn it from?
I don't think they learned that.
What do you do? Just gonna? Why are we in Gullus? For who? Why are we here?
I think it's because a bad thing that we did.
You think they're going to see it on YouTube? They're not coming to the Agudah. They're going to see it on YouTube. They're going to see us wearing.
But I think what David Kuttner is saying is when you give Goyim too much information about our Torah and it's too accessible, then it gives them another place to attack us.
Thank you.
What are you worried? You're worried about saying, listen, so what are they worried? They're going to learn the Ktsois? Which part of
Well, we know it was considered a great Torah when Talmud HaMelech asked for the Torah to be translated. That was considered a great Torah. And it was,
correct.
Why was it considered a great Torah?
So do you want to tell Art Scroll not to translate it? Who do you think is reading
Okay,
Art
so
Scroll?
they...
Right? So are you uncomfortable? They have access now with Art Scroll.
I understand. So there's no absolute. There's not absolute good and absolute bad. They were just bringing up that there's a dimension of it that could be problematic. The Gedolim Paskin, they should do it anyway. But I'm sure they thought about this potential problem and waited. And this attacking people's ideology didn't exist when Art Scroll started doing it. Today, I wonder if we would discuss this with the Gedolim today, due to the danger of attacking ideologies, I wonder what they would say today.
No, I'm telling you, this cancel culture is a terrible thing.
Akiva, we already have an idea for another Zoom show.
Who?
Someone who can discuss this idea and the potential danger, and if it's something that we need to be concerned about. Maybe
Akiva, I wasn't here
Yeah.
at the beginning. Who do you have for sponsors these days? I have Yard Site on Shabbos. I'm happy to sponsor something.
Thank you. You have you had, right? It was your
I know I have this coming Shabbos
this coming
for
week.
my mother.
Well, this week we have Berish Zolti, so Phyllis and Bensi Friedman. And I hope we're going to have a Siyum either Monday or Thursday. We're going to have a Siyum because they're about 5 blot behind. So we're going to have a Siyum Thursday. So we're looking for sponsors for that too.
Yossi, what are you doing? So I'm happy to sponsor something. I have Yard Site on Shabbos. So you tell me what you need to fit me in for it. I'll do it.
Thank you. Okay, I'll text you. We sponsor usually broadcast. It's a weekly sponsorship.
Okay.
I'll give you the viewer, the participant rate.
Okay. Yossi, what are you doing about a Siyum for our later year?
I don't know. I think we should do something.
We should do something. Maybe I could do that also for something with my Yard Site or something like that.
Okay. I'm not sure what's allowed nowadays in shul, or we could do it. We could do something.
Maybe we could do it in my back. Maybe we do it in my backyard.
Okay. That would be very nice.
So we could talk about it. But I have Yard Site on Shabbos.
Shabbos, I'm not
I don't know if you want to have it Zoom. We'll have to have it in the weekday.
It's always much nicer in person, but I'm not around Shabbos. I'm in Jackson for Shabbos.
I hope it's not Andrew Jackson. He did a lot of bad things.
Jackson's Point was a place where they used to say no Jews or dogs allowed.
And Miami,
like most of America. The Supreme Court struck it down. They weren't allowed to have that on titles. I see them in title searches to this day in cottage country.
Really?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if it would say no dogs or blacks allowed? How all hell would break loose?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.